Looking to take your home gym leg workouts to the next level? This 2-in-1 leg press and hack squat machine by RitFit Sports might be just what you've been searching for. So be sure to stay tuned today as we do an in-depth review of this monster. You can find a link to the product in the description below. Please remember to smash the like button and leave me some love in the comments as well.
What's up guys, Enkiri here, and I recently received a pretty sweet new toy from RitFit Sports, this 2-in-1 hack squat and leg press machine. So today we're going to do an in-depth review of this monster. I'm going to discuss some of the pros and the cons so far of my usage of it, and I'll give you guys my final opinion of this machine. So let's get to it. And I want to kick off the review by briefly touching on the assembly process. Now, I have assembled many pieces of home gym equipment in my lifetime. Off the top of my head, I think I've done 5 squat racks, 3 different hyperextension machines, a leg curl machine, and multiple different types of bench setups for the bench press and whatnot. I've also built my own homemade sled for my gym. I built my own lifting platform, as well as several different types of boxes for use in my home gym. And now I've also assembled a leg press / hack squat machine as well. So I'm quite well versed in building and assembling fitness equipment. And I won't lie, this one was a little bit of a challenge as a solo endeavor. Now, it wasn't hard by any stretch of the imagination, but it did take me, I think, around 5 hours in total to put the whole thing together, which is a pretty good chunk of time. And there were several small sticking points during the process that, again, as a solo endeavor, made it a little bit more difficult, but made it feel a little bit tedious. And in their defense, it does say like 20 times throughout the assembly manual that this is a 2-person assembly job, and I did the assembly all by myself, which is why some of those parts were a little bit more tedious for me than they probably needed to be, because it's hard to hold something heavy or bulky in place while simultaneously trying to run bolts through a narrow hole all by yourself. So if you have a buddy help you out with the assembly process, that's probably going to circumvent most of the issues that I ran into. Now, I personally enjoy the challenge of accomplishing things like this by myself, so I took it upon myself to do it as a solo job. Now, I do want to make mention here of 2 aspects that I really appreciated during the assembly process. Like I said, I've put many pieces of equipment together, so I've done this song and dance many times, but 2 aspects that I really appreciated were the type of bolts that they selected to put the machine together, hold the machine together, as well as the way that they packaged all of the nuts and the bolts in the wrapper. So now, regarding the first point, this machine uses a bolt with a square head, right? So for that particular type of bolt, all you have to do is make sure that that square head is pushed into place on the back side of whatever you're securing it to, and then you can easily tighten that bolt on the nut onto the bolt on the other side with just a single wrench. Now, pretty much every other piece of fitness equipment that I've assembled over the years doesn't have that square head on the back side. That square head locks the back of the bolt into place. So without the square head, it means that you actually have to hold the bolt in place with one wrench and then tighten the nut on the other side with the other wrench. Otherwise, you're just going to keep spinning the bolt in circle forever. It's very common for that to be the way that things are put together, and that becomes very, very tedious when you have to put 50 bolts onto a piece of equipment. So having those square head bolts during the assembly process was actually freaking awesome. Further, and this is actually a very simple step, and I don't know why more companies don't do this, the nuts and the bolts were pre-packaged for you on a step-by-step basis. So all you have to do is tear into the package bit by bit. It tells you this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, and you take out each piece of hardware that you need for each step. Whereas every other piece of equipment that I've dealt with up to this point, all the hardware was just jumbled together in a single package. You tear it open and there's 500 nuts and bolts sitting in front of you, and you're constantly having to search for the right numbers and types of pieces for each new step of the assembly. So these 2 things are actually both kind of minor, but overall they were immensely helpful, immensely welcome additions that made that somewhat challenging assembly process much easier to get through. And again, in totality, this wasn't the easiest piece of equipment that I've ever had to assemble. It's a lot, it's a heavy duty thing, but in reality it wasn't all that tough either. And honestly, it's pretty typical, probably something you should expect when you're endeavoring to assemble a piece of equipment like this. Now let's move on to the build quality. And overall, this thing is heavy freaking duty. It is really solid. It's rated to hold 1,200 pounds, which is a heck of a lot of weight. And it just feels super solid and super stable in general. Sometimes home gym equipment can feel janky or unstable. And depending on the piece of equipment, that can be a deal breaker. You kind of get what you pay for when it comes to home gym equipment. There are some brands now that are overcharging, but in general, you typically get what you pay for with home gym stuff. So that cheap stuff tends to feel really janky, whereas something a little bit pricier, a little bit more moderately priced, tends to feel a lot better, a lot more solid, and a lot more stable. And this hack squat / leg press by RitFit, it's made of solid steel. It's got, I can't even remember how many nuts and bolts holding the darn thing together. And when you use it, it does feel very reliable, very solid, and very stable, which is important when you're loading yourself into a position like you're going to be with these types of exercises, a hack squat, a leg press, etc. So it's quite heavy duty for a piece of home gym equipment. It's good value for the quality here, and I'm certainly not going to be hesitant to load this thing up and push my sets hard and heavy once I get a little bit more comfortable just with how the movements feel on this particular machine, the usage logistics of everything, and I won't hesitate to push my sets to failure, hard and heavy here. The nice part about this machine, though, is that in spite of how heavy duty that this thing actually is, like I said, it's solid, it's stable, it feels reliable, but in spite of all that, it's actually really easy to move. So I assembled it in the middle of my gym, right? And then I immediately thought to myself, oh crap, now I'm not going to be able to move this thing, or it's going to be really hard to move this thing. But it actually wasn't. It was actually very easy to lift one of the ends up, the back end up, and just slide it wherever I wanted in my gym. So it's got heft, and it's very solid during use, but in spite of that, it's still not overly heavy to the point of being cumbersome, which is nice because in a home gym setting, it's very important that you're able to easily shuffle your equipment around as needed and utilize your space as best as you possibly can. All right, so now for the fun part. Let's talk about some of the features of this machine. Now, the really cool thing about it is that it is a 2-in-1 piece. So it's both a leg press and a hack squat. In a commercial gym setting, these machines are typically going to be two separate pieces of equipment, right? But in a home gym setting, in my opinion at least, relegating that much space to two different leg machines that accomplish really roughly the same thing, or at least very similar thing, is going to feel pretty redundant. It's kind of going to feel like a waste of space. So if you are a fan of leg machines and you're a home gym guy like me, then you're probably going to end up picking between just one of these two machines. You can't get both, right? I actually have several clients with home gyms, and it seems like it's a little bit more common for people to own a leg press than it is a hack squat, just based on my off-the-cuff experience. But I do actually have some who own a hack squat and not a leg press. I don't know that I have anybody who owns both. With this machine, though, you can do both. And the transition between the leg press into the hack squat is actually pretty seamless. So the back pad has a little clip that holds it in place, and then all you have to do is pop that clip out, and then you can lift the pad up from the leg press position and move it into the hack squat position. And in terms of using the machine as a leg press, a pretty cool feature is that you're actually able to adjust both the angle of the back pad as well as the angle of the foot plate. So this is cool because it allows you to tinker with multiple different setups and potentially emphasize different muscles during the exercise. You can kind of vary the degree of hip flexion versus the degree of knee flexion. As well, this also allows you to find a setup that works best for you based on your anthropometry. I know that personally, I tend to find a lot of leg machines to be very awkward and very uncomfortable on my hips. So being able to toy around with the setup a little bit is actually very helpful for me. This just ends up being a nice little perk of having a 2-in-1 machine like this. Not only do you get access to both exercises, the leg press and the hack squat, but you also gain the option of tinkering with the setup of the machine to create the ideal setup for you. And as far as leg press machines go, for example, this is actually quite an unusual feature. Most leg presses that you run into in a commercial gym setting do not allow you to tinker with the angle of the backrest or the angle of the foot plate. Instead, everything is just locked in place and the movement pattern just is what it is. So again, these adjustments are just a nice little perk to have access to. As far as actually using the machine goes, the exercises are pretty straightforward, but it does allow you to get in a pretty good bit of variety considering that it is a 2-in-1 machine. So far, I've used it for bilateral leg presses, I've used it for unilateral leg presses, I've used it for hack squats, and then I've used it for reverse hack squats as well, which is my favorite way to use one of these machines. And again, all those exercises are pretty self-explanatory. You just need to find the right setup for you, and then you need to be willing to suffer through some pain in the name of building big, strong legs. But if you've got the guts to work hard, this machine gives you the ability to do so. And before we wrap up with a final rating, I just want to discuss some of the major pros and cons of this machine that I've come across so far in my usage of it, starting with the cons. So con number 1 has to do with the leg press. And my only real gripe here is that the foot plate is a little bit narrow. So with that narrow foot plate, I'm not able to take quite as wide of a stance with my feet that I would like to be able to take when I am performing this particular exercise. Now, this isn't a knock against this particular machine necessarily, as I do personally find pretty much all leg press machines to be universally awkward and a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. I've used many different brands over the years, and I almost never enjoy leg pressing on any of them, if I'm being perfectly honest. I much prefer hack squat. But when I am able to take a slightly wider stance during the movement, I can make the exercise much more comfortable for me to the point where I'm actually able to push it a lot harder. In this case, though, the problem is that the foot plate has to be very narrow because otherwise it would get in the way of the safety arms on the side of that machine. And with the narrow foot plate, I'm forced to take a narrow stance with my feet, and that narrow stance makes the exercise feel a bit awkward on my hips. So I'm personally probably not going to be using the machine that often for bilateral leg pressing, but the reality is that I wouldn't have used any leg press machine very often for bilateral leg pressing on a regular basis because I'm pretty sure that any machine is going to start to annoy my hips if I'm pushing it hard and heavy consistently over time. However, the unilateral leg press on this particular machine feels very, very good. I've been crushing that exercise these last couple weeks. For me, it feels much less awkward, much smoother, and much more natural. So I'm likely going to be making that particular movement a staple, a feature in my training moving forward. And con number 2 has to do with the hack squat and the range of motion that is available when you're performing the hack squat exercise. So even when I elevate the foot plate as high as it goes on the hack squat, it still bottoms out well before I've hit the depth that my body naturally wants to go to on an exercise like this. So when I'm performing hack squats, for example, I much prefer taking the movement through my personal maximal range of motion, but I can't do that here simply because of the constraints of the machine. In order to reach my full maximal range of motion, I have to put pads or blocks or something like that onto the foot plate in order to elevate it higher so that I can get more range of motion before the stoppers bottom out. Now, I will say, not everybody is going to have this problem. It really depends on how you're built as well, your anthropometry, as well as what your mobility levels are like. So some people will find that this machine gives them as much range of motion as they could ever hope for, and then other people will be more like me, and they'll find that they're kind of craving a little bit more range of motion than what is available, at least than what's available without making some minor adjustments. And this is a similar issue that I've run into with many hack squat machines across different brands that I've run into in gyms over the years. So I've used several that allow me to sit at the bottom in a fully ATG squat, and I can just hang out there as deep as I want. And then I've also run into some that bottom me out, man, not even at freaking parallel. And for me, those types of machines are basically useless. So this ends up being a little bit of a con for me, not one that is insurmountable though, and it may or may not apply to you. I just feel like I had to mention it, but there are ways for me to, again, work around this issue. So now let's move on to the pros. And pro number one is the ability to house both a leg press and a hack squat in a home gym setting. So getting access to this 2-in-1 machine that allows you to do both these awesome movements without taking up any extra space when space is a highly precious commodity is a really nice perk. Pro number two is the ability to seamlessly transition between exercises from hack squat to leg press, from leg press to hack squat. You can do it in basically 10 seconds. You can switch the machine from one to the other and vice versa. And going into it, I honestly thought that once it was fully assembled, that you would have to unbolt something or a couple of things when you wanted to switch from leg press to hack squat or vice versa. So I was pleasantly surprised when I figured out that it was really just as simple as removing a little pull-out bolt by hand and then flipping the foot plate up or down. And pro number three is the ability to tinker with the angle of the foot plate and the angle of the back rest. As I mentioned earlier, most of the time on a leg press, the angle of the back rest and the angle of the foot plate just is what it is. There's no changing these angles up to change up the stimulus or change up the muscular emphasis or change up the setup to make it work better for you and your build. So this is a really nice feature of this particular machine. And pro number four is the portability aspect. I really thought that once I put this thing together, it was basically just going to be stuck where it was, and that was going to be the end of the story. So again, I was pleasantly surprised to figure out that in spite of the heavy-duty, high-quality build of this machine, that it was actually pretty easy for me to move it wherever I want and easy for me to move it all by myself. And that's really nice because I am constantly reorganizing things in my home gym and trying to make the most of the precious space that I have available. And finally, pro number five is the heavy duty build of the machine. So it's rated to hold up to 1,200 pounds. Not that I think you'll ever need to go that heavy, because the machine actually has a way of making 200 to 300 pounds actually feel really freaking hard, but it does have a very high weight tolerance. It feels very solid, very stable, and very durable while you're using it. So as far as home gym stuff goes, this is a solid piece of equipment. Anyway, that pretty much wraps it up, guys. Like I said, there are a few small cons here, some that I can work around and some that I can't, but overall, this is a pretty cool machine, and I like it. It's heavy duty, it's got some nice features that you don't see elsewhere, and it lets you work your legs very hard in a variety of different machine exercises. The 2-in-1 aspect is really neat, and I'm excited to put in some good work on this bad boy. Overall, I give the 2-in-1 leg press and hack squat machine by RitFit Sports a solid 4 out of 5 stars. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found the review helpful. If you did find it helpful, please remember to smash the like button, leave me a friendly comment down below, and check out EnkiriEliteFitness.com for online coaching and training programs. As always, keep training hard, and I will catch you guys next time.